4. Selene insisted that Zael rest for a day before he began the summoning, but the necromancer needed no such respite and, in fact, was more eager than ever to call up the spirit of Riordan Nasardo. Twice now he had been assaulted by mysterious forces, but the more he meditated on that which had sought to slay him by his own hand, the more he felt the second assault separate from the first. There might be a factor that bound them together, but the latter attack had a more mortal feel to it. Could it be this Lord Jin? If so, then he had studied the followers of Rathma closer than most. The necromancer was very much interested in meeting this particular noble. The skies remained dark the next day, an omen to Zael, but one he did not mention to his hostess. He suddenly began his mental preparations, aware that this summoning would surely not be like most. There were wards and other defenses he would need to prepare. Sardak slept most of the day away, but Selene came early to see if there was any way in which she could assist the necromancer. Zael found her quite different from the usual women of her station, and even most of the men. That had to do with more than merely her gift, something the Rathmanian had run across on occasion when dealing with other nobles. Selene Nasardo was strong of personality and will, and braver than many others. Humbart Wessel was a perfect example. Selene's initial shock did not give way to abhorrence, but rather fascination. When she returned in the morning, she greeted the skull as if he were as much of a guest as Zael, an act which tickled the spirit to no end. Humbart would have regaled her with story after story of their adventures, somehow with him taking the physical lead, but a glance from the necromancer cut him off. He also kept the promise that Zael had forced out of him after the noblewoman had departed following the attack, that Selene was not to know what had really happened. Under normal circumstances, Zael would have needed little time before commencing. But with all he had so far experienced, and the fact that Selene's husband had not answered him during the necromancer's excursion into the netherworld, the Rathmanian wanted all factors in his favor. The hour after midnight, he finally informed Selene and her just-waking brother, before the place of burial.
That would be below the house, in the crypt.
Zael had assumed that House Nasardo had such a place, and suspected that it was the nexus to which the souls he had discovered had been drawn. Good. Then, from somewhere without, a great bell rung once, twice, 3 times. It had a finality to it that caught the necromancer's interest immediately.
The bells,
Muttered Selene, eyes narrowing sadly. She glanced at Sardak, who was, for once, sober.
King Cornelius is finally dead.
Took long enough, Sardak replied. When I die, I want it to be quick, not lingering for weeks like that. Some fragments of conversation that Zael had heard when departing the ship had brought him to Westmarch came back. He knew that the king of the land had been ill, but not to what extent. A new sense of urgency struck the Rathmanian. This death was too timely for his tastes. Has the king an heir? He asked.
3 sons originally, one dead as a youth.
Lady Nasardo pursed her lips.
His heir's namesake died from a spider bite while out on the countryside some months back. Now it's to be Justinian, the 4th of that name.
Justinian the Wide-Eyed, some of us call him, Sardak added, not looking at all pleased. As naive a boy as any ever lived, and he's no older than I.
He had no idea he would be king, Sardak. Everyone expected it to be Cornelius the Younger.
Which will not help Westmarch at the moment, sister. A wise old ruler dead of sickness. A promising hire poisoned by accident. An untried, unready successor. A spider? Zael suddenly muttered. A poisonous spider? Are they common here?
Actually, very rare, but...
Celine got no further, for just then, a white-haired female servant appeared. Wringing her hands and trying not to look at the necromancer, the servant announced,
Mistress, General Torion is at the door. General Torion?
The noble woman looked perplexed. Perhaps he comes to spirit you off to Ingstein, dear sister. Should I pack your things?
Hush, Sardak. Fiona, please tell the good general that I really haven't the time.
Surely you do. At least this day.
Boomed a voice from behind the servant. Fiona let out a squeak and rushed away. In her place there came an epitome of a polished, capable soldier that stories spoke about, but whom Zael had never actually met in life. General Torion had flowing brown hair brushed back over his shoulders and trim beard with a hint of gray in it. His aquiline face sported a small scar below his left eye, one of a brilliant blue pair. He stood a head taller than Zael, and was likely a third again as broad in the shoulders. He was not a giant like Polth, but the cat-like ease in which the veteran officer moved made Zael suspect that the bodyguard would have been on the losing end of any battle between the two. The Nasardo's visitor was clad in a red uniform with a golden breastplate. In the nook of his left arm he carried a plumed, open-faced helmet. High boots, a sheathed sword with a rounded guard made up the rest of his ensemble.
Torion!
Declared Celine, recovering.
To what do we owe this honor?
The commander had first smiled upon seeing her, but now his aspect turned much darker.
You heard the bells. The old man actually passed away last night, but we spent all this time preparing. Justinian's going to need the support of the majority of the nobility from the outset, and all agreed that your word from him would go a long way toward getting that. We don't want a repeat of the Cardulus insurrection.
What happened then? Zael asked. For the first time, Torion, like the necromancer, he seemed to have no other name, appeared to register the black-cloaked figure. The general started to draw his sword.
By the church! What is this dog doing here? Celine, has he taken control of your mind?
Sardak immediately stepped out of any possible path that the man might take in charging Zael. Celine, on the other hand, stepped directly between the officer and his intended target.
Torion! You forget yourself, General!
His reaction was immediate. He released the sword and grimaced as if slapped in the face. The Rathmanian had no trouble understanding why. Torion was deeply in love with Celine.
Celine,
Began the soldier.
do you know what this thing is? Do you know what depravities he commits in the graveyard and tombs of...
Torion!
He quieted but continued to glare daggers at the necromancer. The Rathmanian's hostess indicated him and said,
This is Zael. He is here at my behest. I think you know why.
That trouble with Lord Jin? Celine, if you would just grant me the honor, I've asked more than once.
14 times by my count, offered Sardak. For a brief moment, the general's anger focused on the brother instead of Zael. Then,
As I was saying, if you would just grant me that, this would no longer trouble you.
Torion, Nisardo is my family legacy.
she said no more, clearly having explained her feelings often enough. Eyes again on the necromancer, Torion abruptly snarled.
If any evil befalls her, I can trace it to you, dog. I'll have your head.
In response, Zael only nodded. Before the encounter could become violent again, the noblewoman said,
Give the council my word of my support of Justinian. I believe him to be good for Westmarch. He lacks confidence mostly, Torion, and I think you can help him there.
It's good of you to say so.
He clutched tight the helmet, his face showing a different concern.
Celine, come to me if you need any help. And be wary around this grave robber.
Torion.
Recalling himself, the general clicked his heels, bowing to her at the same time. He gave Sardak a cursory nod and utterly ignored Zael as he departed. That man has a taste for the dramatic entrance, Celine's brother concluded with some mirth. I swear, he timed it as so just to arrive just after the stroke of the bell. I wonder if he had to wait outside for a while beforehand.
Torion is a good man, Sardak.
I doubt our friend here would think so. He made a fair imitation of the officer's grand bow. I think I've overstayed my own welcome. If you need me, sister dear, you know where to find me. Celine did not look pleased.
Yes, the hangman's noose. With that rabble. Be back before the time Zael told us. If you're not coming with us to the crypt, I'd at least like you near.
Have I ever failed you before? The noblewoman kept her expression constant.
I'll refrain from answering that.
With another chuckle, Sardak moved closer and kissed his sibling on the cheek. With a mocking nod to Zael, he left the pair alone.
I'm so sorry about the both of them.
Celine shook her head.
If you'd rather forget tonight and leave Westmarch, I'd understand perfectly.
I will be staying. She brightened.
Thank you.
It is not merely because of your request, he told her bluntly. There are matters that I myself am curious about.
Of course. I should have remembered that those of your calling are not normally found this far west in the first place, unless it's on some important matter.
No, we are not. Zael found himself wishing that such was not the case. It would have been good if he could have found another of Rothma's servants. He would have liked to have conferred with someone else fluent in such matters in order to assure himself that he had not missed anything. But it was too late to concern himself about that. The hour was fast approaching, and he had much more to do.
Can I be of any more help to you, Zael?
There was one way, but he had been loath to ask. It was the first thing that might make her begin to regret having asked the necromancer for aid. Yet it had to be done. If I may be so bold, I will need some of your blood, my lady.
My blood?
For just the briefest of moments, her eyes reflected what he had feared. Then Celine pulled herself together.
Anything for you.
She stretched forth one smooth hand, turning it so the wrist was up.
Take what you need.
Only a drop or two, the Rothmanian clarified, impressed by her willingness to trust him even in this. You are kin to Riordan. However distant, your blood will help call him. I would have perhaps rather asked your brother.
It's better that you didn't. I'm more than willing. Take it, Zael.
There is no need to stand. I would prefer if you would sit, my lady. Please. To emphasize his desire for her to be relaxed, the necromancer held the nearest chair for her.
Oh, you are a gentleman.
She replied with a smile, seating herself.
Thank you.
An unfamiliar emotion coursed through Zael. He quickly immersed himself in the task at hand, taking from his belt a dagger and from a small pouch next to it a tiny smoke-colored glass vial. Removing the glove from his left hand, the Rothmanian began muttering to himself and tracing a pattern before his hostess. Fascination filled Celine's face. She said nothing, made no move. When Zael brought the point of the dagger to her palm, the noblewoman purposely held her breath, which further steadied her hand for the act. Zael pricked her palm. Blood pooled over the opening, but only for a moment. Defying the natural laws, it started coursing up the side of the blade, coloring it crimson. When Zael saw that he had what he needed, he pulled the dagger up. Then drawing another pattern over Celine's palm, he sealed the wound.
You healed it, Zael.
She whispered, touching the spot and finding no trace of the jab.
I didn't think.
We are servants of the balance. If we are to understand death and its repercussions, we must know something about life and its healing process. There are limits, though. As he talked, he maneuvered the tip of the blade over the minute bottle. Muttering under his breath, the necromancer released the blood. Zael watched in satisfaction as every single drop fell into the container. When he was finished, the dagger was spotless. Laying the tool to the side, the hooded figure stoppered the bottle. He looked up at Celine and hesitated. Framed by her rich red hair, the perfection of her features caught him by surprise.
Why do you do that?
The noblewoman asked. At first, he thought that she meant his staring. Her eyes, however, looked not at him, but rather his right hand.
Why do you never take the glove off that one?
Celine pressed.
Always your left hand, but never your right. Ever both.
She was observant. Too observant. A matter of form among those of my calling. He lied. Zael slipped on his other glove, then put the bottle in the pouch. If you will forgive me, my lady, I will need to continue the rest of my work in private. Celine nodded, but her eyes lingered over the right hand. The necromancer shifted it so as to remove it from her sight, and then, with a courteous bow, left her sitting alone. But not very alone. Pulse stood just outside the room, the giant bodyguard eyeing Zael respectively. He had clearly been nearby all the time, although even the Rothmanian had not noticed him.
She trusts you, Master Zael. You should know that is much coming from her.
I will endeavor to do what I can, Pulth. But I promise nothing.
Except that you'll cause her no harm.
Pulth's expression warned the necromancer of the danger he'd risk should he fail in that regard. Zael nodded once, then started past the bodyguard, only to have Polt's thick arm bar the way.
One thing more, Rothmanian. It would be good to stay inside. Friends I have who say the Zac room are asking about black-dressed strangers with the look of grave robbers. They speak the words heretic and desecrator, and fire is mentioned in regard to both.
The news did not surprise Zael. The church ever found whatever excuse it could to hunt down the Rothmanians. Still, he accepted Polt's warning gratefully. The bodyguard could have easily kept such news to himself, and then, once Zael had done his work, allowed the necromancer to walk into the hands of the Inquisitors. I will remember, Pulf.
I'll be with the mistress this evening, too.
The giant added.
Just to make certain.
Of course. Pult finally let him pass, but as Zael headed toward his quarters, he sensed the man's gaze following him long after he had stepped out of sight.
Where have you been?
Snapped Aldrich.
I've gone nowhere with this thing.
Lord Jin angrily waved the moon of the spider about as if it were little more than a trinket he had picked up in the market square. For all the wonder that he sensed within it, it might as well have been a painted rock. Everything he had done had come to naught. Not an iota of power had the noble wrestled from the artifact.
There were matters to attend to, my lord,
replied Caribitis solemnly.
Besides, the night in question is not yet upon us. You must be patient. But you promised that even before that I'd be able to draw from the forces contained in this thing. So far I've received nothing. You are unschooled in the arts, Lord Jin, and so seek to take it with the equivalent of a hammer. What can be yours with the simple twist of the key? Spare me your poetic words, sorcerer. Show me!
Caribitis looked about the chamber. 6 men-at-arms stood guard in what had once been the library of the House of Jin. High wooden shelves lining 3 of the walls bespoke a wide collection of tomes and parchments, but the shelves were now empty, even dust-laden. In the course of his obsession, the aristocrat had thrown out any writing that had not aided him, the result of which had been the loss of several rare works on other subjects. Caribitis ever hid his frustration with Aldrich for this heinous act, aware that his overall goals would only be met by giving his host what he wished. For all his imposing appearance, Lord Jin sat dwarfed by the huge oak table filling much of the library. The polished rectangular piece of furniture had 4 legs shaped like those of a dragon, down a taloned paws clutching spheres. Parchments lay scattered over the table, the wasted efforts of Aldrich's magical spells. Caribitis had known that his host would fail, but had deigned not to mention that fact. Everything had to work as the Rothmanian planned, else his attempt would reorient, the balance would go awry, and the world would slip further into calamity. But it was now time to show Lord Aldrich Jin a taste of what he sought. Caribitis studied the 6 men standing so attentively. His senses probed deep, analyzing their psyches. Yes, they would do nicely. They contained the necessary ferocity within. It only needed to be called forth.
It is very simple, my lord.
Caribitis signaled for the guard by the door to shut it, then strode toward the noble.
Set the artifact squarely in your palms.
The necromancer came around the table, stopping just behind Aldrich. He leaned forward in order to whisper in Lord Jitten's ear.
The men here have served you well. They can serve you better through the moon of the spider.
The noble listened as Caribitis explained what he needed to do. At first, Aldrich looked unsettled, but his expression quickly shifted to one of eager anticipation. The Wrathmanian stepped back the moment that he finished. Aldrich gazed up at his loyal followers, summoning around the table but with a glance. Long in service of the Lord Jin, they silently obeyed. None of them were aware of what had taken place in the ruins. Aldrich focused on the arachnid pattern, his thoughts mentally caressing each limb and outlining the body. As he stared, the shape seemed to move of its own accord. The legs stretched lamely as the spider within stirred to waking. Two bright red flashes, eyes, looked back at the noble, who grinned. Without warning, the spider abandoned its position. Yet, in its wake, the shadowy form left a copy of itself. No sooner had the first moved away than the second followed suit. It also left awake a duplicate, and that too moved on. None of those around him saw this astonishing magic. Aldrich gradually realized that, with the exception of Caribitis, none of those around him saw this astonishing magic. He almost said something, but the necromancer was suddenly there at his ear again.
The blessing of Astraga is yours to bestow, my lord.
The spiders now stood poised atop both the sphere and Lord Jitten's hands. Curiously, Aldrich felt no repulsion from their touch. He gazed at the shadowy arachnids, then focused. Each spider leapt up into the air toward one of the followers. Only at the last did the men appear to notice the creatures. Far too late for any of them to do anything but scream as the arachnids, growing larger as they flew, landed atop their heads. With rasping hisses, the blood-eyed spiders sank their legs into the skulls of the victims. The 6 stricken guards teetered back, some clutching in vain at horror on them, others simply trying to escape. None, however, made it farther than a few steps before falling to their hands and knees. Animalistic howls erupted from their lips. A transformation seized hold of each of Aldrich's chosen. Their backs began to arch and thicken. Legs grew wiry, and feet all but disappeared. Their arms stretched and narrowed, and their hands became splayed paws, but paws still able to grasp and ending in sharp nails designed for scoring flesh. In their frenzy, they began rending their garments, ripping off cloth and armor with equal ease, flinging everything about the chamber with wild abandon. Nothing, however, came within range of either Lord Jitten or Caribitis, the necromancer discreetly deflecting all. Then, from their chests, the 2 lower ribs on each side burst free. The mutilated men howled anew as blood and ichor spilled on the floor. But the wounds quickly healed, and the twisting ribs, now covered in flesh of their own, began sprouting thin, misshapen claws designed for both walking and climbing. The new limbs grew and grew until they were as long as the others, their claws finally slapping hard against the stone floor. At the same time, a coarse black fur sprouted over each man's face and form. Features contorted, stretching and reshaping, the ears and noses shriveled away, and, as Aldrich Jitten continued to watch in fascination, the eyes split apart over and over, clustering together like grapes in 2 macabre groups. Although all the eyes, remained fairly human in appearance, save that both the whites and pupils were now all blood red, they glared without any compassion or sanity. As one, the 6 transformed figures hissed, revealing sharp yellowed fangs dripping with venom. Atop the head of each, a new horror, a spider continued to cling tight. There, Red eyes focused on Aldrich, and the 6 things that had once been men suddenly quieted. As one, they turned to the smiling noble and knelt. There were spiders, huge spiders, but they still remained men of a sort. Spiders, men, and something primal that the noble could not identify. Not that he truly cared.
Incredible! They have become the children of Astraga, who once numbered in thousands.
Explained the necromancer, as if reciting to a class on history.
Mortals blessed with his favor, his likeness.
The children of Astraga bobbed up and down on their back 4 limbs. The other 4 appendages constantly opened and closed as if in eagerness to do Aldrich's bidding.
Your enemies are doomed, my lord.
Corybitis muttered close.
The children serve you unquestioningly. The master of the sphere. You should know to wield this much of the moon's power even before the coming of the convergence is a sure sign of your right to the legacy it holds. All that you dream, all that you would claim, would be yours. Mark me. All of it.
Agreed Aldrich, eyeing those who had once served him loyally as men, and now would do so as both less and more.
And with that in mind,
Corybitis continued,
there is a task at hand. One of your enemies has made himself known, and he strikes at the heart of your hopes and desires.
Aldrich leapt to his feet, mouth curled in fury.
What do you mean?
The Rathmanian's expression remained impassive.
He is in the house of Nasardo, with the Lady Selene.
Immediately, Lord Jin's baleful gaze turned to the monsters that had once been men. Corybitis nodded.
Exactly as I was thinking, my lord.